When the Simon Commission arrived in India in 1928, it was greeted with the slogan, "Go back, Simon." All parties, including the Congress and the Muslim League, participated in the demonstration. In an effort to win them over, the Viceroy Irwin announced in October 1929 a vague offer of dominion status for India in an unspecified future and a round-table conference to discuss a future constitution. This was a proposal for the first round-table conference, which was supposed to be held in London for the discussion of the future constitution. But this did not satisfy the Congress leaders. The radicals within the Congress, who were led by Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose, became more assertive. The liberals and moderates, who were proposing a constitutional system within the framework of British dominion, gradually lost their influence. Thus, in December 1929, under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru, the Lahore session formalized the demand of Purna Swaraj, that was for full independence for India. It was declared that 26 January 1930 would be celebrated as the Independence Day, when people were to take a pledge to struggle for complete independence. But the celebrations attracted very little attention. So Mahatma Gandhi had to find a way to relate this abstract idea of freedom to more concrete issue of everyday life. So Mahatma Gandhi found in salt a powerful symbol that would unite the nation. Thus, on 31st January 1930, he sent a letter to Viceroy Irwin stating 11 demands. Some of these were of general interest. Others were of specific demands of the different classes, from industrialists or to the peasants. The idea was to make the demand wide-ranging so that all classes within the Indian society could identify with them and everyone could be brought together in a united campaign. So, the most stirring of all was a demand to abolish the salt tax, because the salt was something consumed by the rich and the poor alike, and it was one of the most essential items of the food. The tax on salt and the government monopoly over its production, Mahatma Gandhi declared, revealed the most oppressive face of British rule. Thus, Mahatma Gandhi's letter, in a way, an ultimatum. But Lord Irwin, he was not at all ready to accept the demand. And although as it was an ultimatum that if the demands were not fulfilled by 11th March, the letter stated the Congress would launch a civil disobedience campaign. Irwin was unwilling to negotiate. So Mahatma Gandhi started his famous Salt March camp, accompanied by 78 of his trusted volunteers. The march was over 240 miles from Gandhiji's ashram in Sabarmati to the Gujarati coastal town of Dandi. The volunteers walked for 24 days, about 10 miles a day. Thousands came to hear Mahatma Gandhi wherever he stopped, and he told them what he meant by Swaraj and urged them to peacefully defy the British. On 6th April, he reached Dandi and ceremonially violated the law manufacturing salt by boiling sea water. Children, there is a difference between non-cooperation and civil disobedience movement. So let us see what is the difference between non-cooperation and civil disobedience movement. Non-cooperation movement means to refuse to cooperate the government. This movement was launched to unify Hindus and Muslims. Non-cooperation movement began in the year 1921. Women didn't participate in this movement on a large scale, and the main cause of this non-cooperation movement included massacre at the Jallianwala Bagh as well as the Rowlatt Act. But what about the civil disobedience movement? Civil disobedience movement means to refuse to obey the laws formed by the Britishers. This movement was launched to attain Purna Swaraj, and this movement began in 1930. Women participated in this movement on a large scale, and the main cause for this movement includes the unjust laws of the British government, the failure of the Simon Commission. Now let us see what were the effects of the civil disobedience movement. Thousands in the different parts of the country broke the salt law, manufactured salt, and demonstrated in front of government salt factories. As the movement spread, foreign cloth was boycotted and liquor shops were picked. Peasants refused to pay revenue and chowkidari taxes. Village officials resigned, and in many places, forest people violated forest laws, going into reserved forest to collect wood and graze cattle. Beside that, worried by the developments, the colonial government began arresting Congress leaders one by one. Among them, one of the famous personality was Abdul Ghaffar Khan. He was a devout disciple of Mahatma Gandhi. He was arrested in April 1930, due to which the angry crowd demonstrated in the streets of Peshawar, facing armored cars and police firing. Many were killed in this attack. A month later, when Mahatma Gandhi himself was arrested, industrial workers in Sholapur attacked police posts, municipal buildings, law courts, and railway stations, all structures that symbolized British rule. The British government was frightened with this, so the government responded with a policy of brutal repression. Peaceful satyagrahis were attacked, women and children were beaten, and about 1 lakh people were arrested. In such a situation, Mahatma Gandhi once again decided to call off the movement, and he entered into a pact with Irwin on 5 March 1931, named as Gandhi-Irwin Pact. Gandhiji consented to participate in the second round table conference. The conference that had been, because the first round table conference that was boycotted, but the second round table was accepted by Gandhiji, which was to be organized in London, and the government agreed to release the political prisoners. Gandhiji agreed to call off the movement, and the British government agreed to release all the political prisoners. So, in December 1931, Gandhiji went to London for the conference, but the negotiations broke down and he returned disappointed. Back in India, he saw that the government had begun a new cycle of repression. Ghaffar Khan and Jawaharlal Nehru were both in jail. The Congress had been declared illegal, and a series of measures had been imposed to prevent meetings, demonstrations, and boycotts. Seeing all this, with great apprehension, Mahatma Gandhi relaunched the civil disobedience movement. But for over a year, the movement continued, but by 1934, it lost its momentum. Now let's see that how participants saw this civil disobedience movement. Which were the important groups which participated in this movement in first attempt, but later on they were not so keen to participate in this movement? Here in this chapter, we will study about the 5 groups: about rich peasants, poor peasants, industrialists, industrial workers, and women. So let's describe all these 5 categories in detail. Rich peasant communities. In the countryside, rich peasant communities like the Patidars of Gujarat and Jats of Uttar Pradesh were very active participants in the civil disobedience movement in the first time. The rich peasant communities expected the revenue taxes to be reduced, so they joined the movement. For them, the fight for Swaraj was a struggle against high revenue. But they were deeply disappointed when the movement was called off in 1931 without the revenue rate being revised. So, they did not rejoin the movement as the movement was called without revising the revenue state. Now, let's see about the poor peasants. The poor peasants wanted rents of lands to be remitted as many of them were small tenants and they used to cultivate land they had rented from the landlords. As the depression continued and the cash income dwindled, the small tenants found it difficult to pay their rent. They joined a variety of radical movements, often led by the socialist and communist. But the Congress was unwilling to support the no rent campaign because they had a fear of upsetting the rich peasants and landlords. So, the relationship between the poor peasants and the Congress remained uncertain. What was the role of industrialists? During the First World War, the Indian merchants and the industrialists had made huge profit and become powerful. But after the war, their huge profits were reduced and wanted protection against import of foreign goods. To organize business interests, they formed the Indian Industrial and Commercial Congress in 1920 and the Federation of the Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries FICCI in 1927. The industrialists like Purushottam Das Thakur Das and G.D. Birla attacked colonial control over the Indian economy and supported the civil disobedience movement when it was first launched. They gave financial assistance and refused to buy or sell import goods even. But the spread of militant activities, worries of prolonged business disruptions, growing influences of socialism against the young Congress forced them not to join the movement in relaunching. Let's see what was the effect on industrial workers. The industrial working class did not participate in the civil disobedience movement in large numbers. Only in few places in some regions the people participated, like in Nagpur region. As the industrialists came closer to the Congress, workers stayed aloof. In spite of that, some workers participated adopting some selective ideas of the Gandhian program, like boycott of foreign goods, as well as part of their own movement against the low wages and poor working conditions. They did the strikes. The strikes were done by the railway workers in 1930 and dock workers in 1932. In 1930, thousands of workers in Chota Nagpur tin mines wore Gandhi caps and participated in protest rallies and boycott campaigns. But the Congress was reluctant to include workers' demands as this would alienate industrialists and divide the anti-imperial forces. Now let's see what was the role of women. Women also participated in the protest marches, manufactured salt, and picketed foreign cloth and liquor shops. In urban areas, these women were from the high caste families, and in rural areas, they came from rich peasant households. Women began to see service to the nation as a sacred duty of theirs. Gandhiji was convinced that it was the duty of women to look after home and hearth by, by being a good mothers and good wives. Congress was reluctant to allow women to hold any position of authority within the organization, and it was keen only on their symbolic presence. So ultimately, the women also became disappointed in the second relaunching of civil disobedience movement. Now let's see that which group of the society did not participate in the civil disobedience movement. Among them, the two groups were Dalits as well as the Muslims. Firstly, let's study about the Dalits. These will be referred as an limits of civil disobedience movement. And children, this question often comes in the board examination. So for the long, the Congress had ignored the Dalits for fear of offending the Sanatanis. Who were Sanatanis? The conservative high caste Hindus. But Mahatma Gandhi declared that Swaraj would not come if untouchability was not eliminated. So in that process, he called untouchables as Harijans, the children of God, and he organized satyagrahas to secure their entry into the temples and access to public wells, tanks, roads, and schools. He himself cleaned toilets to dignify the work of Bhangi, the sweepers, and persuaded upper caste to change their heart and give up the sin of untouchability. But the Dalits did not actively participate in the movement as they demanded reservations of seats and separate electorate. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the leader of the Dalits, formed an association in 1930 called the Depressed Classes Association, which clashed with Mahatma Gandhi at the Second Round Table Conference, London, by demanding separate electorate for Dalits. As children, we read in the previous topic that when Mahatma Gandhi decided to withdraw his civil disobedience movement in the first attempt, and the Gandhi-Irwin Pact was signed. According to that pact, the second round table, the Congress decided to participate in the second round table, and we got the conclusion that the negotiation broke down in that Congress. The main reason was of that breaking down of negotiation was the separate demand by the Dalits as well as by the different other parties also. So here again, the second round table conference, London, there B.R. Ambedkar, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar demanded separate electorate for Dalits, due to which the negotiation was not done. Ultimately, in September 1932, Pune Pact was signed, which gave the depressed classes reserved seats in provincial and central legislative council. But the condition was that they were to be voted in by the general electorate. So in 1932, Pune Pact was signed, and it gave the depressed classes reserved seats in the provincial and central legislative councils. Now let's see about the Muslims. The leaders of the Muslim League, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, wanted reserved seats for Muslims in Central Legislative Assembly. Negotiations over the question of representation continued, but all hope of resolving the issue disappeared at the all-party conferences in 1928 when M. R. Jaikar of the Hindu Mahasabha strongly opposed efforts at compromise. Thus, alienated from the Congress, many Muslim leaders feared that the culture and identity of minorities would be submerged under the domination of Hindu majority. So, large section of the Muslims did not participate in the civil disobedience movement.